Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Lindholm. I'm a Director of Solution Architects in the Americas. I'm actually from Detroit, Michigan. I've been with SUSE for a little over 20 years, working in a variety of solution architecture, pre-sales roles. I currently manage a team of engineers covering Canada, the Northeast, Southeast United States, right? I'm also a member of our SAP Champions team. We have a working group within the company that is comprised of individuals around the globe that are working in the field to better our mind share and our expertise in the field, looking at customer engagement and bringing forward best practices. For this year's event, I brought forward a session on securing SLES for SAP in the public cloud. How many of you are SLES for SAP customers today? I see a couple of hands. How many of you are in the public cloud, or is it on-prem? Public cloud, public cloud? Okay, great. The information we're going to be going through today is relevant to both on-premises use cases as well as public cloud use cases, right? It's also relevant across the three major hyperscalers, looking at AWS, Microsoft, Google, but many of the tier 2 providers and the specialty niche providers in the SAP space could take advantage of the work that we're doing here as well. The material we're going to be reviewing is well documented in the slides. The slides we made available to you in a PDF format. I'm happy to share my contact information as we're wrapping up as well. We have a relatively small room, so if you guys have questions as we're going through the material, please feel free to speak up. Just raise your hand and I'll do my best to pause and make sure that we're getting the questions answered as we go. And the way I've got this put together is it's a few slides interspersed with demo, a few slides, trying to keep everybody awake. So let's have a little bit of fun. So you guys all understand who SUSE is. You're at SUSECon, right? We've had a focus within the company for secure software supply chain and helping customers harden and secure their Linux environments since the day I started here in 2004 when SUSE was acquired by Novell, right? We've invested heavily in terms of industry certifications, federal government data security certifications, both here in EMEA as well as in the United States and abroad. And we're going to talk a little bit about the specifics that we've done to harden SAP for CIS benchmarking, for public cloud profile hardening. We have a set of predefined defaults that have been reviewed by the SAP Linux Labs team from SUSE that is working in Waldorf, that are a good starting point for putting together profiles. We'll take a quick look at the Compliance as Code project and some of the auditing tools. I've actually got an interactive demo showing you the hard way, the easier way, and then the really easy way. Understanding that hardening is not a trivial topic. I purposely marked this session as intermediate because there's some assumed knowledge here, because auditing is hitting all elements of the operating system, looking at configuration automation, security policy, and looking at the various types of tuning that need to take place with respect to securing your compute environment. So some good discipline in terms of your skills. If you're going to go down the path of hardening an environment is good. We're trying to help lower that bar a little bit by providing some tools that make it easier. We're also going to take a look at the images that SUSE has provided within the public cloud provider marketplaces and in the community image libraries with the major hyperscalers that apply some of this hardening out of the box. And then we'll look at how to automate it with SUSE Manager. So if we look at the why are we securing things, this is probably a pretty obvious topic. You're seeing articles left, right, and center in the press looking at specifically how different organizations across the entire spectrum of the operating environment have vulnerabilities that are plaguing customers, partners, and infrastructure providers that are trying to plug the holes as they go. You know what I mean? And the nature of open source lends very well to being able to collaboratively and work in a community mode of plugging those holes. But the key here is visibility and awareness, right? And I know a lot of the security domain owners that I speak to spend a lot of time reading and just researching and understanding what's happening in the marketplace, looking at current events, looking at recent exploits, also subscribing to our social channels and our blogs. I mean, there was a blog that was put out by Sebastian Martinez last week on confidential compute, which we will hit on for a few moments. That really looks at the full stack experience of how we could secure an operating environment, including the data at rest, the data in transit, as well as the data that's currently being processed within the virtual environment, right? Point being, there are plenty of things that need attention, that needs fixing, and ultimately we have to prioritize, right? And if we're prioritizing and thinking about how do we get our head around preventing a supply chain attack, things like SolarWinds, when they came up with the hosted environment that was attacked, were treacherous, looking at data exposure, looking at risk that was introduced for not only the specific victims, but the proliferation of these attacks as they become more commonplace, and making sure that you're patched and taking all the due diligence that is possible based upon the maintenance and support that SUSE is providing, as well as expertise you're getting from your partner ecosystem, your hardware vendors, your cloud providers, is really going to be important. If you think about preventing supply chain attacks, it's really about attack surface. Within our cloud native portfolio, we talk a lot about zero trust, right? In terms of looking at the software supply chain and what's coming into the environment and understanding how things have been certified, talking about admission controls, talking about the variety of policy engines, reporting and auditing interfaces that are available to get visibility. Well, the next step is taking action, right? And if you use a certified platform like SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, you're in a much better position to have a secure starting point based upon some of the work that we've done on common criteria certification, for example. We also have gone through and verified a number of our libraries and executables for federal information processing standards, and overall best practices for hardening and how people are taking advantage of what I would call our configuration best practices, which are documented in the SLES for SAP documentation or in the SUSE Linux Enterprise Server hardening guide. Being able to apply that information and use it is paramount. So if you think about the characteristics of a secure system, what we're really talking about is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if you think about securing your SAP landscape, you have a number of applications that are running within this infrastructure. And security is an ongoing process. You'll see in some of the SUSE manager sessions, the wheel, you know what I mean? Thinking about the life cycle of instance provisioning, maintenance, all the way through to and including deprovisioning when it's time to recycle and deploy new instances, right? We have technology that we've included as part of the portfolio that allow for better uptime and availability statistics, looking at HA, failover scenarios. How can I build in resilience? How can I build in redundancy? How can I recover quickly in the event that there's a challenge? Doing that at scale with tools like SUSE Manager and leveraging things like live patching allow us to get closer to that 5 nines goal of maybe I only want to reboot my system annually. It's cost benefit, right? We fix common vulnerabilities and exposures of 7 or higher for current shipping kernel environments, as well as a couple of core libraries in the user space live patching environment, like OpenSSL, glibc. And that live patching capability is guaranteed for 13 months on any given maintenance kernel release, meaning that when you enter, we can actually work to help forestall the need for a reboot as part of the what I would call maintenance and management experience, because I'm sure many of you are managed in basically gold on unplanned outages, downtime, uptime and availability. Seems to be a common trend. So if you look at our role in this stack, again, supply chain security, the bits going into the environment, making sure they're secure in the first place, looking at not only the compilation of the upstream open source code and the work that we're doing to harden, but also the people, the process, the way we post maintenance. It's all consistent, it's well documented. We've actually gone through ISO certification, ISO 27000 series, looking at our processes for data security, privacy controls. We've gone through and we respond quickly as we can to common vulnerabilities and exposures and fixing high-profile issues as soon as possible. And if you ever find a CVE, for example, that you have a question on, it's called pick up the phone, call your SUSE support engineer, and ask them a question. Because if we don't have the maintenance update out yet, it might be available in a test package. Or at least we might be able to give you an ETA or work with you to help understand what the concern might be. We've got some enhancements coming in SUSE Manager that we'll talk about in a minute that will help with the forward-looking view of how vulnerabilities are being tracked outside of the patch channel, right? Because the patch channel contains all the vulnerabilities that we've released fixes for. There are other vulnerabilities that are in a reserve state or might be in a just announced state. And one of the things SUSE Manager has done is it's in a future release coming up later this year, it's going to start taking the oval off of SUSE.com, which is our comprehensive security profile for the platform, and using that for the auditing trust compare database instead of using the channel metadata, which will let us have visibility to CVEs beyond the scope of what patches have been released for. So let's talk a bit about platform. So you guys have probably seen this slide before. This is our common code base. These are the products we bring to market, the variants that we package. And whether you're running on mainframe, Power, Intel, ARM architecture, in the public cloud, in VMware, on physical servers, we aim for consistency, right? And because we work off of a common code base, the certification work we do in many instances is very much applicable, looking at the hardening standards and some of the bit level certifications that we go through. There are specific libraries that are in the certifications module that have been validated for federal information processing standards, for example. And when you think about FIPS compliance, common criteria, and even the work we've done with the US government and NATO allies around the Secure Technical Implementation Guide, or the STIG, for SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, all of this goes up the stack, right? Meaning that we're starting on the bottom, treating this as a code base, and making it easier to consume. And while we may have common criteria certification for SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, and it's been evaluated by the government organizations and the compliance organizations that go through and do that certification, all of those best practices continue to come through to the other distributions, even if we've not submitted what I would call the formal certification paperwork. It's really the process and the people and the how we are doing it, right? So this is just a really quick overview looking at some of the acronym hell that we have here. One of the things that you'll find in this domain is there are acronyms galore, looking at SCAP, STIG, SCAP security profiles, SRGs, NIAP, NIST, DISA. There is an acronyms index on our website that would be helpful in helping you guys figure out what some of these acronyms are. Our documentation very contextually tries to point that out as we're going through as well. What's important here is that the certifications are wide and maintained over the long term of the platform, right? And we're very much looking at ongoing work around FIPS certification, the work we do with regards to the documentation and the auditability and the hardening of the STIG, which is very much applicable to CIS benchmarking and SAP hardening, looking at how compliance as code works, which is the upstream open source project that we use to build this infrastructure. It's absolutely relevant. The FIPS environment is really going to look at crypto libraries, random number generators, and making sure that those point package releases meet specification, looking at defense information processing standards. And if you think about the common criteria bits, what we're really talking about here is an escalating level of certification, because if you think about starting at level 1, which is functionally tested, going all the way to formally verified, design, and tested, you've got varying levels of due diligence, cost, and time associated, right? Where SUSE falls in this list is at level 4 with an augmented EAL4+, right? And what that EAL4+ allows us to validate, both for the product as well as looking at things competitively, looking at the evaluation profile, is that the plus really gets into the company, the production, and the security updates and the maintenance that we're providing around the platform. This is not an effort that your other companies on the left side of the screen have gone through. They're definitely common criteria for certified, but the plus is a secondary level of assertion, looking at our physical plant facilities, our development environments, how we build using our build service, how we package maintenance, how we deliver from a process perspective to ensure the best uptime and availability that we can as part of the maintenance investments our customers are making with SUSE. When you think about the common criteria certification, it's really an iterative process, looking at code review, package selection, automated testing, manual testing, build, delivery. And every time we go through maintenance updates, our system is continuously doing both automated as well as periodic manual checks through our security team. Our maintenance team is anchored in the security organization, looking at how we build and deliver maintenance patches. We fully index the updates both on the website as well as in importable electronic format, like an OVAL, for example, which is a standards-based documentation of CVEs and other vulnerabilities as you're going through. At the end of the day, though, we have the certification for EAL 4 Plus Augmented. It's valid through 2026, which was initially aligned with the first just about end of life, but we've extended the SLES 15 life cycle through 2031 at this point. AJ, do you happen to know offhand if we're going to renew that? Do you know if we're going to be renewing past 2026 for the common criteria? Okay. So AJ is one of our product managers in the SLES for SAP space. I should have introduced him before asking him a question. The current certificate is through that date, but we're basically pursuing additional updates, right? What you'll see geographically, though, is that different geographies and different countries have different standards looking at how they evaluate common criteria certification and information use standards, right? And in the United States and Canada, where I'm from, you're going to find a lot of emphasis on common criteria, FIPS, as well as the STIG, specifically looking at the US federal government standards. In Europe, there's a lot of focus on common criteria, as well as a couple of other standards across different countries and geographies. So let's talk about compliance as code. Before I get into this, is there any questions on the certification work that we've been doing? Just checking my watch here, we're doing good. Okay, so I'm gonna push along here because I've got a lot more material. Compliance as code is a project that's hosted on GitHub. This is where things like the Federal Information Processing Standards around the STIG are anchored from an upstream evaluation perspective. There's a framework that has been built to basically take and codify the written policies that you might get from the federal government into machine actionable code or machine actionable audit profiles, right? And as part of that audit framework, what you'll see on this screen, and I'll give you a zoomed in copy of this here in a few minutes, is the ability to evaluate in the context of a given profile what your conformance is. Am I compliant, right? Compliance is always in the eye of the beholder. And when we think about how we're scoring, the idea is to be able to sort and filter the responses on each of the evaluated items. Did I pass it? Can it be fixed? Is it informational? Is it a fail? Is it an error? Is it not checked, not applicable, or otherwise unknown? The whole point is that you can actually schedule these reviews to go in periodically, and the system can bring back results that can be audited as part of your ongoing security analysis, right? The other thing compliance as code is going to do beyond documenting the standards and allowing you to audit is remediate. What is really neat about this project is it can actually take a compliance report and generate a remediation. That remediation can be an Ansible playbook. It can be a bash script. It can be Puppet manifest in terms of looking at the types of fix files that can be created, and they can be created contextually based upon the server that's been audited so that you can fix the machine that is your target, right? And if you look at SUSE Manager in that context, doing this at scale with system set manager and system set groups and being able to audit multiple machines concurrently, or maybe applying fixes across a larger domain, is absolutely a time saver and allows for a lot of consistency. You'll also see a lot of interoperability here. All of the enterprise Linux providers, as well as community providers, have pretty well signed into this project, looking at the anchor that they're using to document compliance as code, right? So if we think about another element, how many of you are CIS benchmarking within your environment? Center for Internet Security benchmarks. Okay, see a couple of hands. A lot of focus on this across the IT organization, not only on Linux OS platform, but looking at cloud native and composable, other application spaces. The hardening refers to basic cyber hygiene practices recommended by the Center for Internet Security. They have level 1 benchmarking, level 2 benchmarking, and the benchmarking can vary based upon a server or a workstation. We have different profiles that align to these types of use cases, right? These benchmarks aim to reduce the vulnerabilities and protect against widespread cyber threats. And applying these standards is critical. What's interesting, though, is when you start hardening, the compatibility of the operating system platform becomes more of a concern. Because if I start tuning down and locking down interfaces and limiting processes and doing all the things that security directives might require you to do, you may need to relax some of those directives in order to take full advantage of the security profile. It's always a negotiation looking at the base platform profile versus the applications running on top. And if you were to look at it from the US government perspective, the idea would be I have a base operating system, STIG, or Secure Technical Implementation Guide, that locks everything down. But I also have an application STIG that documents the specifics functionality needed for that app and the use case justification for making changes, allowing for what I would call flexibility and control. So SCAP is the Security Content Automation Protocol. It is NIST standard, looking at the National Institute for Standards and Computing. SCAP uses a variety of overlaid individual specifications in parallel to automate continuous monitoring, vulnerability management, and security policy compliance, and being able to do so at scale when reporting. So what you'll find in the Compliance as Code project is a lot of overlay. There's a base set of things that are going to be common to all OS platforms, right? Looking at the different checks that are being pulled in as part of a profile. And if you start overlaying what is the difference between CIS benchmark level 1 for servers versus SLES for SAP hardening, you've got a lower list because SAP requires some of those items to be relaxed in order to be functional with SAP HANA or app servers or other workloads like NetWeaver kernel or other foundational packages that might need to be run within the environment. Where this comes into play is really looking at the compliance side, which I have customers who are legally required to comply, right, in terms of their adherence to what I would call federal information processing standards, as well as general best practices for security overall. We do have a public cloud specific set of hardening profiles that are applied to our default images in the public cloud, and we have a secondary set of hardened profile images that look at the next level of items that are taken into consideration. If you think about some examples, I could use a SCAP profile and an XCCDF, which is the extensible declarative format for looking at this information interchange to say, I want to disable SSH root login, or maybe I need to configure SE Linux a specific way, or maybe I need to deploy and configure AID, looking at the audit logging and validation of packages, right? All of this is also anchored in an open implementation called OpenSCAP, which is an open source implementation of SCAP. There are proprietary implementations of SCAP. Within the OpenSCAP project, we actually have SCAP Workbench, which is a graphical environment that we'll take a look at for interacting with these profiles, as well as OSCAP, which is the command line infrastructure, right? So if you look at the SLES for SAP hardening profile, I think today there are 202 directives that are included. There are an overlay of 69 public cloud hardening rules, as well as 46 rules from the CIS Level 1 benchmarking that have been pulled in addition to the items that we've deemed required for an SAP environment that are what I would call that least common denominator experience, right? So let's transition over to demo for a few minutes. As I'm getting over to my other screen, any questions? Great. All right, so where I want to start with you guys today is a little bit of a web tour, specifically looking at the Compliance as Code landing page. And again, these links are in the slides, and we'll be happy to provide them to you. But if you come down here, it's going to have a little bit of what we've already spoken about. I'm not going to talk through all this. But there are some really good tutorials out here around how do I get started? How do I write a profile? How do I augment and add directives to a profile, right? And most of this work has been done in Python. We're trying to do most of the heavy lifting, looking at the various things going into the evaluation environment. Sorry, I'm gonna grab these and bring them with me. The SCAP security guide, or the SSG, is really the focal point for any given platform, right? Meaning that we have a SCAP security guide, RPM, that is installed on SLES 15. It's available for SLES 12 as well, even though it's coming to end of life. And what you'll find is various pieces of metadata and other resources being downloaded, like our oval or other compliance component infrastructure that has been sourced to go into our build profiles, right? That SSG can then basically be used as a data stream with SCAP profile auditing, with the extensible configuration checklist description format, which is an input that OSCAP uses for basically going through and doing an evaluation. We'll see how quickly that goes here in a moment. You can also do evaluations against the oval, looking at common vulnerabilities and exposures and getting results back on things like CIS benchmarking as well, right? Where this becomes real for our customer base is in our hardening documentation. So this was last updated on June 13th, so last week. These are living docs, so if you ever find an error in here or have suggestions on enhancements, there's a feedback link at the bottom of the page where you can contact your solution architect. These three over in the corner work for me. They absolutely are happy to take in customer feature requests and help with making sure that people understand what we're trying to implement here. There's a good summary here around what is SCAP and OpenSCAP, some of the benefits, the packages that are involved. And what you'll see here as a starting point is, in order for me to use the security guide and the OpenSCAP tools to do an audit, I have to put in a core set of packages, right? Looking at OpenSCAP, OpenSCAP utils, and the SCAP security guide. We do actually package SCAP security guides for other platforms in the context of SUSE Manager, meaning that SUSE Manager is multi-platform Linux management, and we do keep them up to date with the profiles that are posted out on the Compliance as Code webpage, right? We also have SCAP Workbench and SSG Apply. SCAP Workbench is kind of the second step beyond the command line manual evaluation that can give you a kind of a pick and choose dialogue for looking at profile elements and picking things that are in or out in the context of the policy that you want to define. And once you define that policy, if you include 120 of the 200 hardening directives, because those are the ones your organization feels are appropriate, by customizing it, the report can then come back as, I'm 100% compliant because I'm only evaluating 102 items, right? We'll look at that in more detail here in a few, but again, you've got some good glossary here looking at different definitions and where they come into play, as well as some example use cases, some screenshots of the tooling, and some how do I get started at the command line, right? Let's skip forward here for a minute. So what I have here running on my MacBook is a SLES 15 SP5 SLES for SAP instance. And I have pre-installed a couple of packages here to avoid the download time. But I'm going to walk you through the commands required to do a basic scan and then take a look at the output with you for a few minutes to give you an idea of what's been packaged. So if you were to follow the documentation, the first thing you need to do is install OpenSCAP, OpenSCAP utils, as well as the security guide, right? And instead of me furiously typing and getting typos and having to type and retype again, I've got a nifty little script called command exec that lets me feed it an input file, right? So I'm just going to hit enter here, and it's going to say, wow, these are already installed. Done. Moving on. I want SCAP Workbench too, because we're going to look at the graphical environment that makes this a lot easier to use here in a moment. Moving along. Already installed. Good to go. So, in order to run a scan, the current working directory should be pointed at, sorry, I should turn off notifications here. The directory should be pointed at user share XML SCAP SSG content, right? And if we look at the contents for this directory, what you'll find is a SCAP security guide for a variety of SUSE platforms. We have one package that we maintain for OpenSUSE, SLES 12, and SLES 15. This covers all service pack variants of SLES 15, meaning that if you're on SP4, great. You've got 4.5 years of life cycle. Use it as long as it's in maintenance. And by the way, we'll sell you extreme life cycle beyond, reactive and extreme life cycle beyond the 4.5 years if your organization needs that kind of coverage, right? But what we're most interested in here is this SSG SLE15 ds.xml. The ds is the data stream. The 1.2 version above is tied to the DISA-STIG, which is the US federal government implementation. But what you'll see here is when I go through and I do an OSCAP info against this file, I will get a list of profiles that are included as part of this implementation, right? You'll see a little warning up here. By default, the system will not go fetch remote evaluation resources, looking at the oval, for example. If I wanted to do that, I could do the fetch remote resources to download it, or I could download it and do a local files option. There's a choice there. But the idea is looking at the different standards, from the ANSI standards to CIS benchmarking, level 1 for server, to coming down a little further, hardening for public cloud images, SLES for SAP, as well as an ID. It's this ID in the second line that you're most concerned about, right? And there were a handful of checks that it went through, looking at the oval, CPE oval, as well as the OpenSCAP and the dictionary that are being used. And what you'll see here is a very long and complicated command at the bottom that I've kind of broken down in the notes working up to it, right? So you have two options for local files or for fetch remote resources. These are optional. I do not have them included here because I don't want to wait for an 11 meg download, right? SCAP unzipped is, I think, 11 meg right now. I think it's about 6 megabytes zipped, and it's all XML. It's heavily detailed. When you look at the profile, I'm basically taking that profile definition that was output on the previous page. I'm telling the system to generate a results file in an XML format as well as a report in HTML format. And I'm going to point it at the data string file. And what you'll see here is the system will then go through an audit, and it's compiling the XML output and going through and creating the report. You'll notice that I have a bunch of fails here. I did that on purpose. You guys need to see what it looks like when it fails, because I'm going to show you a better looking one here in a minute, Julia Child style, right? So if we go back up to the top, what you'll see here at the beginning, it's going through all 202 directives that have been configured here. It'll give you the same error around not downloading the file, but it'll give you some minimal output for each item in the evaluation and what its CCE identifier is, looking at its categorization and enumeration in the list of controls, right? Got many that are passing, and then I've got a bunch that are fail or otherwise not part of the platform, right? I am going to close this mail first. Sorry about that. You guys don't need to see my notifications. I'm also going to come over here and change focus to do not disturb. which I should have done earlier. All right, so this is finished. And if we go back down to the bottom, what you'll see is that it's now listed as done, right? So if I come back to my file browser, I output a report. I have an XML file here too. This, again, is about 12 meg. But if I open up this HTML report in Firefox, you're going to get a very nicely formatted output that is server specific at this point. It tells you which profile was used for the evaluation. It will give you some detail around who performed the evaluation, when it started, when it finished, how long did it take to run. You can look at the identifiers, what IP address this instance has, as well as the CPE platforms. Now, if we come back and we look at the compliance and scoring, this one didn't score very well. Again, hardening is an art form, and we package our Linux distribution for common use cases, ease of use, and what I would call sane defaults, right? I have customers that need more secure infrastructure, looking at certifications like CIS benchmarking. This 39 could go up to 80, 83 by applying some tuning in terms of looking at policies like you'll see below. It gives you a categorization of the failed rules. There were 4 that were medium, high, or low, 3 that were in the undetermined state. And if you kind of look through, this filters by default on the groupings that fail. And these are all nested, and I can come through and show you all the ones that pass, for example, meaning that if I come back here, system knows that AID is installed. It's configured AID to verify the audit tools, to make sure the tools themselves have not been compromised. And if I look at the directives on installing AID, it gives me a pop-up to say, okay, this is the identifier it's attached to, and how do I fix this? I install AID with Zipper, right? And you actually have a case where it's installed. It gives you the version of it, as well as the signature ID and the extended name of the package, right? Where this gets more interesting is on things that fail. And if I come back and I look at this secure session configuration files for login accounts and setting interactive session timeout, I can click here, and you'll see that I can set timeout in Etsy profile or set it in autologin.shell as part of the profile. It gives you the parameter that's required. By the way, I have a button here that says, show me the remediation script. This remediation script is exactly what needs to be executed to put yourself in compliance with this directive, right? So if we continue forward, you'll see I've got a Ansible playbook here that could be executed locally to get the same outcome. This is really meant to help automate, and it gives you the evaluation criteria. Like if I'm going and looking in the profile directory in the actual Etsy profile file itself, I basically want to search out and filter for that parameter, and it's going to go look for it. It's going to bring back a result, right? So a lot of neat stuff here. And again, this is one that has a lot of fails in it, right? And I haven't hardened this system. But if I come back here, given that the topic for this session is public cloud, right? I can come over to another environment, and I'm going to run SCAP Workbench. Actually, I'm going to run SCAP Workbench locally, and then I'm going to run it against the cloud. So what I'm going to do here, this is just for so this is just for speed of run. I want you guys to see how quickly this runs, and when it's running locally and not via SSH, it's certainly faster, right? We need to select a profile. We have 3 installed and available per the security guides that were installed. Apex SLES 15, load content. And what you'll see here is the same list of profiles that we had in the command line output. I'm going to select the hardening for public cloud image of SLES for SAP, right? And I have a choice to run this against a local machine or a remote machine over SSH. This will give me a complete list of the rules, and I'm not necessarily customizing anything here, saying what's in, what's out, right? But I do have the ability to either dry run this. I can tell it to fetch the oval from external sources or any NIST websites where it's going to pull information. And I can optionally remediate right here. That might be a little dangerous if you don't know exactly what it's doing. You could potentially lock yourself out of your server. Be careful, your mileage may vary, you know what I mean? There's typically some expertise and some opportunity to help yourself, shall I say, you know what I mean? And I have a consulting practice within SUSE as well as partners, one of which we'll talk about at the end of the session as we're closing up, that have deep bench in this area, and they are global in terms of what they can deliver and how the environment is put together, right? So the only warning here is it's just referring to the fact that it didn't download the XML, so I'll go ahead and close this. But I actually can hit show report here, and instead of generating it and then opening it in Firefox, what the system will do is allow for that report to be opened up off the desktop, right? Neil, how am I doing on time? Okay, I need to get moving. So if you look at the SCAP demo report, the other thing I wanted to come back and show you was looking at the public cloud instance. This is the output for the instance that we just finished up. If we come back and we look at the example for the public cloud, i.e. this XCCDF evaluation, what you're going to see here in the pre-hardened instance is I now have 14 that are failing. Looking at the 188 that passed with the 14 failed, and the 14 that failed are things that I changed to facilitate this demo in terms of creating additional accounts, turning on password-based authentication, and doing a few other things like that, right? What's neat here, though, again, you can get the remediation and get visibility and report this in a manner that can be remediated pretty easily, okay? So some screenshots here. We're just going to cruise past these to save some time. And again, the interesting piece here is when you click inside of a Google screen share, it actually will follow the link, which I did not want it to do. There we go. So moving along, you see the policies. There is a customization capability. If you hit customize in the upper right-hand side, I have checkboxes. I can pick in and out what has been added here and what's available. When you look at instance hardening, it is a multi-step process. We have pre-provisioned images that have what I would call the hardened best practices that have been reviewed by the Linux labs that are a good starting point. That doesn't mean that they're appropriate for every use case. You're going to need to build this in your lab and make sure that your workload is executing properly. If there were U-limits set that were constrained and your application needs more, yeah, you're going to have to make some changes, right? But you're basically looking at some pre-hardening, determining your gap by a profile audit, and then doing some post-provisioning to relax and implement additional controls where required, and then following your application hardening rules, right? When we look at hardened images in the public cloud, we do provide an index of every image that we publish against the hyperscalers, the big three, looking at Microsoft, AWS, and Google, as well as Alibaba. And if you narrow down by provider and region, you can search for hardened and get a list, right? What I can tell you is the green check boxes indicate that we have both BYO and marketplace offers with two of the providers, and BYO offers with AWS, right? The fact that it's a BYO offer shouldn't matter, because if you're using marketplace images, we do provide a default script that can be executed against any currently deployed or newly deployed environment, because there's a default remediation that's been packaged. It's in the documentation, meaning that you could use the standard image and run the script and get to the same outcome. We're just politely publishing new images that are tagged hardened, that have validation and attestation as part of our confidential compute program, right? Another topic here that's interesting as we're finishing up, again, I'm not doing a deep dive on confidential compute here, but if you look at regulated industries and organizations that have significant data controls, confidential compute is exceedingly important in the realm of the security stack. And being able to look at the layers of involvement, looking at data at rest, data in transit, data as it's being computed, and the ecosystem enablement you'll find from Intel Trusted Domain Extensions and AMD Secure Encrypted Virtualization. You'll find the cloud providers using these capabilities as well as on-prem, right? And when you think about how this works, it's basically a layering of capability. And if you work from the bottom up, thinking about storage encryption, we have crypt control that can be deployed in an HA format on a public cloud that can host your encryption keys for standard LUKS-based encryption. If you were doing disk encryption of the LUNs and wanted the keys to be sourced during boot automatically, right? TPM is also a thing, as well as virtual TPM, looking at where that encryption seed can be placed for decrypted boot so that it's married to a VM instance, and if somebody tried to disconnect that storage and put it somewhere where it didn't belong to access it, it wouldn't be readable, right? And again, the confidential compute with data and memory and CPU, those are new hardware enhancements brought out by the component vendors, as well as integrity attestation that helps for looking at the full stack experience from Microsoft, Google, and AWS is also doing some work there as well. But you'll find an overlap. So as we're finishing up here, any questions from the room? I know that we're getting tight on time here, and I hope this was useful. The last thing I'm going to lead you with is that we do have SUSE Manager SCAP profiling as part of the product. And this actually is the easy button in terms of feeding the input variables to SUSE Manager and saying, run this against a group of servers in an automated fashion, right? And what you'll get is a very clear output of pass, fail, error, unknown, not applicable, and the such. And if you look at how this has been configured from a consumable perspective, the last piece really gets into, let me get out of the slideshow. Log in and I can just show you really quick what this looks like. This SUSE Manager instance is running in AWS. SUSE Manager is available in the marketplace now, built against marketplace consumption or included with SLES for SAP State or BYO. We've got some choice there. If I come back to my system list and I go into my system that I've onboarded, I did an audit previously, you can basically see the same results here as the 14 that I was referencing a moment ago, and you can do that via SSH with SCAP Workbench, or SUSE Manager can do this at scale. And if we look at the details, you'll find the same types of output as well as the report HTML that's here. And what you'll see is the same output that you get from SCAP Workbench coming straight out of SUSE Manager, right? So, wrapping up, 3 things happening in SUSE Manager that are very security-centric that people are very proud of in the engineering organization. Abid, who's our product owner, has worked pretty hard to get SCAP integration very much enhanced. And one of the things we're doing is running SCAP audit scans on client systems from the server, right? So instead of running them locally, in the future with 5.0 and with upcoming maintenance, the idea would be to have those executions run on the server so that they cannot be tampered with and get the same results without running them locally, right? I already mentioned the OVAL data coming in and being used in lieu of the channel metadata for security compliance detail on patch and package releases. We're also adding attestation features that can look at public cloud images and the attestation labels and markers and visualizing those within SUSE Manager. The one partner that I wanted to highlight here is one that I've been working pretty closely with in this area for the last year, Vinomic. Unfortunately, Alan was not able to join me out here this week, but we did a joint presentation with them at SAP Insider about a month and a half ago. Sherry was one of the co-presenters. And they actually have a very impactful practice looking at CIS benchmarking for SAP environments. And the example that they've provided here has this particular customer use case up to 88%, right? The key is that you have some complexity on how people are tuning their environments. And the idea is to A, provide the documentation and the resources, but also the services, the support, and the hand-holding where required, understanding that security is complex. There are typically budgets allocated for assistance of outside resources in many instances. Alan and team have done a really good job. They are using our hardened images as a base for their software as a service offering that they're overlaying into the environment. And they're bringing forward some additional value looking at some of the compliance readiness reporting and documenting some of the business case and cost savings. So these are the links we have, and this is where we're finishing up. So any questions from the room? I know it's been a mouthful and I've been moving at 100 miles an hour. Hopefully everybody has picked up something today. We'll make the information available to you guys. And ultimately, I'll be around if there's any questions. I'll also be in the solutions lab this week along with the product team. So appreciate everybody attending. Thank you very much.